We'll wait a couple of minutes before we get started, just so everyone can log on.
Woohoo! Happy Asia Pacific American Heritage Month. It doesn't roll off the tongue very easily, but we're going to make it roll off the tongue, right?
An APOM sounds weird.
Because I've seen it differently, like Asian Pacific Islander American Heritage Month or Asian Pacific Heritage Month. So I think officially it's Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. But when I say Pacific, I always want to say Islander because it's like Pacific what? It's not specific.
All right, let's just go ahead and get started. Welcome, professionals, educators, students, and a few family members. My name is Carolyn Locke. I am the 2020-2021 President-elect for PRSSA National. I'm extremely excited to be moderating the first of many PRSA Diverse Dialogues, which is presented by the PRSA Diversity and Inclusion Committee. It's a series that is dedicated to educating our community on how to best approach groups and issues that have long been overlooked in our industry. So this panel is in honor of Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month and how we as PR professionals can support this community. Especially considering what's going on in the world around us, this is definitely a conversation that should be happening, and I'm extremely excited to be a part of it. We have almost 200 attendees, which is, wow, breaking a lot of records. So thank you all for joining what's sure to be a very thoughtful discussion. So let me begin by introducing the panelists joining us today. First, we have Angela Shikara, a researcher and consultant from the World in 2020 project. We have Soon-Yi Kim, the Executive Vice President and Global Diversity and Inclusion Leader at Porter Novelli. And we also have Ted Nguyen, immediate past president of OCPRSA and the senior manager of external affairs at the Orange County Transportation Authority. Thank you all for being a part of this discussion. We will begin with around 30 to 40 minutes of Q&A and then open it up to questions from the audience. So without further ado, let's begin with the first question. So the COVID-19 pandemic has obviously created, negative sentiment toward Asians all around the world. So from your perspective, how have you seen the API community being impacted by COVID-19? And if Sumi, if you want to start us off with that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Carolyn. It is really an honor to be here with you and this panel, as well as the broader folks that have tuned in. I think it's really clear that in this time of COVID-19 that while we are all affected, we're also experiencing this pandemic very differently. If we look specifically at Black and Brown communities, we know that these communities account for a smaller population, but still a very large number of COVID-specific deaths. What we see in the Asian American community and those of Asian descent are facing incidents of personal, physical attacks, verbal attacks, to the degree that I think many of us feel unsafe in a country that we thought was our country as well. So I think more generally speaking, just fear and concern for our personal safety and also questioning our sense of belonging.
Yeah, definitely agree. Ted, do you have any insight to add on this question?
I do. I think it's, first of all, I wanted to say thank you to the Public Relations Society of America. It's an organization that I belonged to since I was in college. So it's a great organization. So, and also to all the professionals out there, it's been a really difficult 2 months, but I know that that PR is rising up to that challenge. And then thirdly, I want to say happy Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. It was previously known as something else, but Islander was added to it since I've always had a hard time not calling it Pacific Islander. So now it's Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. So I'm happy to be celebrating with all of you. Particularly happy to know that we do live in America. We're facing this unprecedented pandemic that's impacted and inflicted so many people. And our hearts go out to all those people that have lost lives, their family members, and all those people that have been displaced by this horrible, tragic disease. I also wanted to share that, the impacts as far as, what we're facing as far as the virus itself, in as much as the virus itself and the horrible toll that it's taken, we're also facing the virus of hatred and bigotry. And that's something that we can help control and prevent as well. And I know that the Vietnamese American community here in Orange County, as well as Southern California, we've risen to that challenge of providing for our fellow Americans in delivering more than 1 million PPEs worth $30 million to healthcare workers and providing 32,000 restaurant meals to them as well. And this is really fighting the misperception of the Asian virus itself. And we're doing that by our words, but more importantly by our deeds. And I can't wait to share with you how PR has taken on a leadership role in doing exactly that, and combating both the virus, but then also the virus of bigotry and incompassion and hatred as well.
I'm glad you bring that up, Ted. That kind of leads me to my next follow-up question. Considering our environment that's going on, what can PR professionals do to combat this anti-Asian hate? Reaching the audience that have, been facing this, these criticism from a lot of people in America. So, Angela, if you have any thoughts on that, we can start off with you.
Sure, thank you. And thank you to the PRSA community and the organizers. Special shout out to Janine and company. And congratulations to the class of 2020. So best of luck to you. So as I think about the Asian American, what the impact has been on the Asian American community, I can also think about what the impact it has on the Latino and African American communities and us more widely. I think from my research perspective, my research was released, it's titled World in 2020. It was released back in January. And I discussed the lack of diversity and inclusion as a social risk. And so if diversity and inclusion is not in place, how it poses a social risk to an organization. And so I think from an organizational standpoint, employees are looking very closely, at how their organizations are being inclusive and being empathetic and connecting with them. And more widely, and organization stakeholders are looking to see how they're actually solving problems. So when I think about an organization, how is it contributing to society? How is it identifying problems and solving problems based on the diversity of skill sets within an organization to shift and come up with solutions to problems, just like you've seen in the pharmaceutical industry, where there's been collaboration and other industries such as tech. You also see organizations that, while there are organizations that are laying people off right now, there's also organizations that have recognized that they need to take care of their employees and see how they're feeling. So the Asian American community, for example, reach out to them to see, how they're doing. And they can do that through owned content, because at this point, we're looking for leadership, and we're looking for good information, and we're looking for where that trust is going to be. And more often than not, in today's time, we're looking to our organizations for support.
Yes, I definitely agree that education, especially when it comes to diversity and inclusion, is very vital to, create correct messages when reaching these audiences. And I like how you brought up your research report. That's going to be a great tool for PR professionals to look at when we are trying to combat this, anti-Asian hate. Which brings me to my next question. Are there any other good resources you recommend for people to check out if they want to dive deeper into the impact that COVID has had, on the world, or especially with Asian Americans? Sumi, if you want to talk about that, or if anyone wants to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, sadly, there are a lot of articles out there because there have been a lot of hate incidents out there. There have been at least 3 websites that I'm aware of. One is called Stop AAPI Hate that was formed to basically log all of these incidents, these hate incidents. And within the first couple of weeks, there were about 1,100 that were reported. I think that's actually quite low relative to what's really happening out there. And I think the only reason that number has not continued to increase significantly is because we've been sheltering in place. I think there's a lot of fear out there that as we come out of this, that just like the virus numbers increases, the hate incidents will as well. So that's one place that you can look, but I would say many of the major publications have all covered, some element of this. But I honestly think it's not enough because it's an ongoing issue, and I think it will continue to happen as we move forward.
I actually, sorry, may I add to it?
Yeah,
Caroline? So I think, in the New York area, so there's the New York NYC.gov. So go to your state for resources. So the Commission on Human Rights, the Mayor's Office for the Prevention of Hate Crimes, and the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs are coordinating closely to educate the public about their rights and protections in light of COVID-19. So there's an online forum, so you can go to their website or call. They have a special number, 311, and I'm sure that there are other states that are coordinating their efforts.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, there are different campaigns that have been going on, whether it is Wash the Hate, hate is, racism is a virus, hate is a virus. There's also one recently called All Americans that really focus on a lot of these issues, and I recommend looking into those.
Thank you. Ted, did you want to say something as well?
Yeah, I think, the resources all around us, PR professionals were very, very, very resourceful. So it's just a matter of, going on doing Google search as well, but then also relying on those within your certain chapter or within your municipalities or locations to be able to find out those marketing and communications and PR professionals that are available. It's those same go-to people that you've relied on that will also have those connections for further resources as well. So utilize your existing relationships and then branch out to those people that have other relationships. And so really together we can combat this effectively.
Thank you all for those answers. Yeah. For all our attendees out there, definitely take note of all the resources that were just talked about. I think, just even being on this call is already a resource that you're already, starting to have these conversations and learning how to approach these groups. So thank you for that. So just kind of building off of that, what are some of the biggest, or what's the biggest insight that you as PR professionals yourself can share for others who are working with APIs, in campaigns and there's focus groups and such? What's your insight? And Ted, if you want to talk about that.
I think that my biggest insight is knowing that the API communities or the Asian Pacific Islander community is so incredibly diverse. There isn't a single language that unites all of us, unlike Latinos or Latinx communities. So there's so many different languages, and even within those languages, there are so many different nuance of dialects, etc. So you can't fit us all in one box. There isn't a one size fits all. So really target, the audience with the right message at the right time as well. And then realize that there's varied cultures within each one of our subcultures as well. So really approach it holistically, but then also divide and conquer, really taking a segmented approach and really driving a strategy that makes sense to those. And really also utilizing technology. Technology is something that's so critically important, especially among, middle-aged and younger generations as well. Senior citizens, obviously the traditional methods of phone calls, face-to-face at a social distance, obviously, physical mailings, et cetera, is still very, very effective. But you have to carve out a really targeted approach in working with our diverse communities in the API community. And then also realize that, sometimes things won't work. So you have to try something differently. So be very, very flexible with the Asian American community. We're a very flexible and nimble group ourselves. And so I think we expect that. And the other thing that I want to communicate is be there first. I think there's a huge level of respect among Asian Pacific Islanders for organizations, nonprofits, businesses to be there first and to establish that relationship. I think, at that ground level, if you can do that, you're going to win big and cultivate that huge relationship of trust. And trust is everything with our community. It's all about trust. And so if you can instill that trust, be there first, be there for them, you're going to win not only short term, but long term as well.
Thank you, Ted. Yes, definitely. Trust is the key. Angela, did you have something to add on as well?
Yeah, yes, and I think Sunmi is going to probably echo this allyship, right? So just create allies. So it's not just about developing, understanding, the Asian American communities as not just one block, but that they're very diverse, different histories, different communities, generationally they're different. We're going to talk more about it on the panel that the Museum of PR is putting on next week, May 27th. So allyship. So how do you connect with the Latino communities and the African communities as well? I heard today, it was today, and it resonated very much with me. My parents came into the country in the late 60s. And when they came in to the country, it was a matter of assimilation. And today it's a matter of multiculturalism. And so, there's much more openness and being, bringing your whole self to work. So ensuring that you're building an inclusive work environment and contributing to building an inclusive work environment, which leads to helping others, within your workplace and developing better campaigns and avoiding blind spots and connecting with multicultural audiences.
Thank you. Sumi, did you also have something to add on?
Yeah, what I would just kind of build on from what both Ted and Angela shared is that Ted's absolutely right. I mean, when people think about what it means to be from Asia, I think people have an idea that it might be like East Asian, right? Or maybe Indian, right? Because it's such a populous country. But when we think about what makes up the continent of Asia, and it's upwards of like 45 different countries that we're not necessarily united by a specific religion, language. I mean, you name it, it's a very diverse group. And so in some ways I kind of joke that it's a big box of other, that like Ted says, has so many different nuances to it. But I think the other part of that is even just overlooking the fact of Americanness, right? I kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but when we even use that word xenophobia, that means fear of foreigners. So this idea of being this perpetual foreigner, John Cho wrote about this in the LA Times a few weeks ago about one of the things that we've learned from COVID is our conditional sense of belonging, our conditional citizenship, our conditional Americanness, as we're told to go back to the country, to our countries, wherever that is. And I'm like, I was born here. But, I'm not seen that way because, we wear our race on our face. And when people are spat on and had verbal attacks and racial slurs directed at them, I think there's a certain thinking that we need to just realize more broadly as those that are Americans that are on this call is that are we thinking about Asian and Asian Americans specifically as conditional Americans as well? And so I think this period of time is a time to just examine that.
Yes, Ted, did you want to add something else?
Yeah, I also wanted to share, that, it's not we and they, it's us together. And I think that's an important component of us because we don't look like the traditional, American, whatever that means anymore, but I'm as an American as anybody else. And I think we not only show that by our words, but also by our deeds. And that's something that's really, really important. Growing up in school, like my parents forced me to speak English just as well as the neighbor down the street. And I learned how to write better than, XYZ. And so I think nowadays, I think, we don't necessarily need to prove ourselves beyond, what we're doing in our daily lives, but I think we still need to prove ourselves in this horrible era. And I know that the Vietnamese American community has done that. When nail salons were decimated by the stay-at-home order by the governor of California to issue the first state, nationwide, for California to stay at home, the industry was just devastated. 80% of Vietnamese own nail salons in California. And so when the governor made his remarks, that was very, very hurtful, but instead of going out and protesting, we continue doing what we've been doing for the last 2 months, and that's by giving back, by taking the PPEs that the industry has known for decades and have utilized that rare commodity to provide it to our brothers and sisters in healthcare who are also Asian American, who are also Latino, who are also African American. And that's just demonstrating that. I think in Southern California, we created this huge movement called Nailing It for Healthcare Workers. And now it's mushroomed and caused a wave all the way to New York City called Nailing It for America, in the donation of 1 million PPEs, 32,000 restaurant meals, a total of $30 million worth of valuable PPEs. And that's really demonstrating that we're just as American as the next door person. And I think yesterday, for example, it was our 100th anniversary. And I've done this all purely as a volunteer. There's been 5 core members of this whole movement, all Vietnamese American. And there's a stark contrast. What we were doing in providing 100th giving back opportunity to a senior healthcare facility, providing almost 1,000 meals, as well as 1,000 PPEs to this center. There are protests demanding that the salon owners go back to work, right? They were demanding it's time to go back to work now. And the media contrasted that with us having a meeting with our congressman civilly, and then going out and providing thousands of meals to seniors and their healthcare providers. That stood as a huge stark contrast of what we can do together as Americans, helping fellow Americans.
Thank you all for that. I definitely echo your sentiments about building community and creating allyships, especially during these times. So something else I also want to bring up, it's definitely no secret that Asian Americans are hard to come by when it comes to, the communicators and PR professionals. I think especially, I think at University of Florida, I think less than 5% of our PR department, our students is less than 5%. So what are your thoughts on how can we work to retain and attract more APIs to the profession? Angela, if you had any thoughts about that, if you want to start off, Self.
Sure, thank you. So I think it's about understanding, Asian Americans and thinking about your recruitment efforts and thinking about implicit bias, which is something that we haven't touched on yet. Just being aware of your own biases and organizations thinking about how they're going to recruit, what colleges they're recruiting from, how they're going after top talent, how they're retaining them. And when it comes to retaining the top talent, it has to do with inclusion, and it has to do with that diversity of skill sets within the organization and sense of belonging. I can give you an example. I love what Sumit, does at Porter Novelli on Monday nights. She has Mentor Mondays, right? And she gathers people within her organization, and they share. And they share bits about their culture, about their sense of belonging, within the agency. And I think efforts like that, and if you think about diversity and inclusion being core to an organization's purpose, I think is invaluable. Diversity and inclusion is something that the new generation that's coming up through the ranks is paying very close attention to. And in these times like COVID-19, the pandemic, there are companies that are cutting budgets, when it comes to diversity and inclusion. And that's not what, in my opinion, what they should be doing. They should be focusing on, on their talent, on making sure that their talent is taken care of, and thinking about the long term instead of the short term. And that ties to corporate sustainability. How is a company sustaining, right? How is it? And that's tied to talent. It's tied to recruitment. It's tied to innovation. It's tied to product development. And so I think Asian Americans, like other communities, I think it's important to understand who they are and really look at where you're actually recruiting from, because mind you, this is not, this is socioeconomic too. And if you're looking at your audiences and you're looking at who your consumers truly are, they're not of the 1%. It's varied. And so we have to understand that socioeconomics is also at play.
Thank you, Angela. Sumi, did you have anything to add?
Well, thank you, Angela, for the shout out for Mentor Mondays. But honestly, Mentor Mondays was formed because I remember when I was just starting in this profession, and I didn't know that much about what public relations was. And I certainly didn't know too many people that were in the corporate environment. I didn't have a lot of the knowledge that I think a lot of people go into this profession with. And so the idea behind Mentor Mondays, and it's not just internal, it's external as well, for those from underrepresented communities to have access to people and knowledge and advice that they might not otherwise be able to access. So yeah, I agree with a lot of the things that Angela said. I mean, I think that whole idea, if you can see it, you can be it, is important here as well. And I think it's just really important, even just names, right? So can I just tell you how many times I've spelled my name and how intimidating my very phonetically spelled name is for most people? So at this point, I've got to shout out to my first mentor who was like, hey, Sumi, you would be great in PR because your name is so memorable and, all of these really positive things. And I have never heard that about my name. I learned to hate my name because it was something that distinguished me as different and other and foreign and all of that good stuff. And then it's only recently that I have learned to embrace that. But even things like what your name is, and I know many people in the African American community can relate to this as well. I mean, there's so much bias even in terms of what our names are and who gets in the door, who gets recruited for even, I guess, open houses and internships and so on and so forth. So yes, I think it's all part of a more kind of systemic issue as it relates to enticing and retaining people into our profession.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. And it's really touching what you said, just shared, Sumi. Because, you know, growing up, my Vietnamese name was just like horrible. It was Kong, you know, so could you imagine, you know, like you know, like when I was in first grade, you know, and having kids surrounding me and singing the song, I'll never forget it. King Kong played ping pong with his ding dong. It was just horrible. So I'm glad that you said that. Now it's like very empowering that, you know, my parents decided to, you know, rename me Ted, because that was the one item that I clutched onto when we fled Vietnam into the US and flew on an aircraft here to the US, was a teddy bear. And I always remember that. And I always remember the shame that I felt, you know, in that playground. And I made a promise to myself, you know, under no circumstance will anybody make fun of anyone around me by their name. And so I will call out somebody if I hear that. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us that we as professionals know how words are so critically important. And so those bullying tactics, you know, at every chance we take, need to call people out for their hatred. And it starts with us, and we need to feel empowered and impassioned to be able to do that. And, you know, I'm so glad that this venue is available for all of us to share our vulnerabilities as well as opportunities for us to build a greater nation. And we can't build a greater nation with children that are intimidated. So I really appreciate this opportunity. I just wanted to put that out there. I wasn't planning on putting that out there.
It was beautiful.
But,
Thank you
Yes,
but
thank
you
you
know,
so much.
for sharing.
and there's so many different resources. I want to give a huge shout out to Larnie Decanay. She's an amazing individual. She is like the heartbeat of diversity and inclusion. And she does things behind the scenes and in the background. She doesn't want any limelight. And I just wanted to give her recognition because I love Larnie. And she's an amazing individual and a force to be reckoned with, even though she does things in the background. And she's provided so many different resources in that chat box as well. So I really appreciate that. And I hope that chat box becomes available because Larnie is such an invaluable member of our community. So thank you, Larnie.
Thank you all for sharing those
Hi.
answers with us, and for Ted for being for honest and vulnerable with us. I think a lot of us can relate to those kinds of stories. So thank you so much. I also just wanted to tell all of our attendees as we start to wrap up the original Q&A to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to send in your questions. So just to go off of that, what advice do you guys have to Asian Americans who are looking to pursue a career in public relations or communications? I am, you know, of course, a senior about to graduate in about a year. So if any insight you guys can provide would be amazing. Angela, if you want to start us off.
Okay, so thank you very much, Carolyn. I think be bold, be brave, and be unapologetically you. I know that every time I walk into a room that I break down stereotypes. I know that because of who I am. And I am unapologetic about it. My parents poured everything into me and my brothers. And I know that when I walk into organizations, I'm bold and they don't know what to do with me. And the fact is that it's a challenge because organizations are not keeping a pace with the changes that are happening in society and the lack of understanding of who their talent is. So my advice to you is go. You prepared, you work hard, you keep learning, you stay curious. And if the organization is not working for you, and if people are not being collaborative, because that's the name of the game, it's about being collaborative and it's about solving problems together. And if you're not and the idea of hierarchy is gone, okay? So if you're in an organization where there's a hierarchy and you keep coming up against something My advice to you is don't waste your time and get out and keep moving, because you're wasting time, because it's not you, it's the lack of inclusion, and that points to the lack of inclusion. And the challenge that organizations have today is that, it's no longer about the organization. It's about how is the organization going to retain talent. And that talent can get up and walk out. And that talent is an investment of resources. And so my advice to you is you keep going and keep striving and keep asking questions, and develop allies and develop relationships within organizations, in and out. And I agree, Ted, that was beautiful what you said, and thank you so much for sharing. And Sunmi, same to you. I think that it's important to find mentors and sponsors, because as you're going up through the ranks, you need to have a pathway. If you don't understand where you're going, then how are you going to get there? So find, maybe it's so wonderful that that PRSA has put on, this webinar, because it never existed before. And so just to see people who look like me or who've had similar experiences to me is so powerful, because we realize that at the end of the day, that we're all connected.
Yeah, those are such beautiful words. And I think, this is such an empowering webinar, and it's something that wasn't planned for. Obviously it happened, and I think it happened magically because we are all here at the right place at the right time with the right company. And I think, if this can be the start of many, many conversations and many bold actions from us as professionals, I think that's going to make a difference to the lives of so many different people, as examples that you all are to the next generation as well. And then I also wanted to speak to mentorship and just providing that relationship. And I think in Southern California, we're really fortunate to have such a rich, diverse melting pot or mixed salad or whatever you want to call it, of PR professionals, but also with journalists that are members of the API community. And I think that's that relationship that's been cemented over such a good period of time, that's been that's enabled us to be able to thrive in this environment. I think particularly in Southern California, it's not a nice to have, but it's a must have to be a member of a diverse community. We bring additional talents, insights, resources, and passion to whatever we do to make a difference. And part of it is this business. We're such a rich culture in Southern California that business, government agencies, nonprofits, and others realize that. They know that they have to tap into this or they're going to fall behind. And I think building ourselves as resources, I think it's going to bode well for the future of PR. And PR can't afford to be the past that it was. It's got to boldly go to the next wave of the future.
Thank you for those thoughtful answers. So the last question I have before we go into audience and Q&A is, how do you see communication tactics and outreach toward Asian Americans evolving in the next 5 to 10 years, or where would you like to see it going? Sunmi, if you want to start that off.
Okay, so how do I see things going? I want to say something hopeful. But honestly, I'm scared. I am actually scared, because I feel like what I see is a lot of normalization of hate directed at many, many groups. And so that concerns me. And I think we're at a really pivotal moment in terms of what the next 5, 10 years, 15 years look like, Carolyn. I think this is a moment where we have to take stands, that we have to be confident and bold, and we have to not only stand up for ourselves, but for one another. And I think this is really, sadly, during this terrible pandemic, I mean, it presents us an opportunity to do that, to see hate for what it is, how it impacts others. And there, I think, lies my hope, is that that we can reach across our communities and even learn about our own in that manner. And kind of to that effect, there's a PBS 5-part series going on right now called Asian Americans. And I just watched it this weekend, and I loved it because it was such a celebration of not only my culture, but other kind of Asian American cultures as well. But also I was really ashamed too, because like, gosh, I should know so much more than I do. And so I think that understanding our history is really critical, because in the same way that African American history is American history, Asian American history is also American history. And so I think that girding ourselves in knowledge is really, really important as we move ahead.
Thank you. Angela, do you have anything to add on to that?
I just think we are becoming so globalized. You know, so if you look at someone, you know, they are an individual. They're not just seen as being Asian American, but they're, you know, we're connecting in all sorts of different ways, you know, and there's intersectionality that's at play, right? So the ways in which people identify, you know, how do they identify themselves? How, you know, what's their identity? So I think in the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to see, you know, multiculturalism even more pronounced. I think you're going to see organizations. I think stakeholders of an organization are going to be looking to the organizations for guidance, for support, for leadership, in telling them how to navigate, what resources they should trust, who they should trust. Content-wise, I had mentioned this earlier. I think there's an immense opportunity for owned content, you know, for organizations to develop owned content and really connect with the Asian American community and internally and externally. So over the next 5 to 10 years, I see much more integration of diversity and inclusion, you know, because what we are going to come to realize even more is that it is a race for the top talent. And so organizations need to recruit and retain the top talent. And that top talent is coming in all forms, and Asian Americans are talent. And so how are organizations going to retain Asian Americans as top talent? And how are those skill sets going to be used to identify and solve problems in society? Because you have this new generation that's coming into the workforce now. So it's not only about being Asian American, but it's also generational, that may or may not be connected to their history, right? And that, you know, wants to contribute to society and work for an organization that contributes to society. And so if we're in a situation like we are in now, you know, organizations are utilizing their talent within their organizations to identify and solve problems and say, hey, we need to shift. You know, how do we solve these problems given the skill sets and the diversity of thought? So it's like you're going to have an Asian American sitting alongside, you know, somebody who identifies as being Chinese, somebody who identifies as being from India, somebody who identifies as being from the middle of America. And also, I just want to add that this is not, diverse inclusion, and this panel is not just about Asian Americans. It's about what Ted had talked about. It's about socioeconomic disparities. It's about solving problems in our societies. It's about becoming more humane.
I agree with all that. Yep.
So thank you. Sorry.
No, I totally agree. And I totally love what you said about content. Own content, and we own the content.
Yes.
So I just wanted to share with everybody what my thoughts are as far as, in a photo of what I think you guys are. You're heroes. You're heroes on the front lines of doing everything possible to be an example for all of us. And I just thought of this, it's just popped in my head, but why not, starting next Thursday, if we can gather across the nation and do something as simple as holding up these cards, right? These are foam core cards. They're small foam core cards, and we spell out a message in Koreatown in New York, Little Saigon in Orange County, LA with Persian Americans all across the nation. On next Thursday, at a certain time, we mobilize and do this. And this is an example. I'm gonna just play it. It's like 30 seconds long, but we did this all in 2 days notice. We did this to commemorate the anniversary of when Vietnamese Americans first came to America as refugees, to commemorate the 45 years since we've been here, but more importantly, to thank our frontline workers. So we can do something like this, started with PR professionals across the nation. So I'm gonna just play this short clip from ABC News so that you guys can see. But it was as simple as just having a drone that we flew, and then we did a time-lapse video.
Giant display of gratitude. Look at that.
Oh, just pause. But anyway, I'll show the rest. So go ahead and continue. I'll figure it out, and then we'll show it.
Sorry, Carolyn?
Yes, go ahead, Angela.
I'm sorry, I just want to, I see, I'm just looking at the chat box, and I see Lisa Brown Bannock, sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. I just want to respond to her comment about we are not becoming globalized. We already are. Many of us more than one race and culture. That's what makes America great. I agree with you, but I think we are much more interconnected than we ever have been. But we're going to see more of that happening, where we're going to become much more interconnected. But there's also a discussion that this pandemic is going to make us more isolated. That we're going to return to, all the progress that we've made over the last 20 years is going to be reversed because of the pandemic. So our, jobs as PR strategic counselors is very important. It's about how do we foster better relationships? How do we educate people in our country about our various, communities within the states and around the world?
I think Ted's starting to show.
Yeah, I have it ready. So here we go.
A giant display of gratitude. Look at that. Literally, check out this time-lapse video. The local Vietnamese community is marking the 45th anniversary of the fall of Saigon with a special tribute to healthcare workers. This is near the Vietnam War Memorial in Westminster. This afternoon, boards from the sign will be distributed to families so they can write their own message on them. They'll later be delivered to hospitals across the U.S. What a nice idea.
And it's just cool. Looks like a bunch of little ants writing thank you heroes. Let's go over to Brianna.
So if we can do that, I think that would be amazing. It would mark a milestone moment in being unified as different API communities. So if anybody wants to do this with me, we'll do it Thursday. You'll have a lot more notice than we did. We only had a day and a half to pull this together, but it's as simple as having a drone, a couple drones up there, do a time lapse, send it to the media, get coverage as part of the conclusion of API Heritage Month. So whoever's in it, email me, tednguyenusa@gmail.com.
That's great.
Thank you for sharing that, Ted. I'm going to start going into audience Q&A just for the last 10 minutes. So the first question, sorry if I'm pronouncing names incorrectly, by the way, comes from Andrea Gills. What organizations do you think are doing well right now with the API community and engaging them effectively? Sumi, if you have any thoughts on that, if you want to share.
Oh, Carolyn. I don't know the real answer to that question. And because I think what people are doing more traditionally is people are using their ERGs, right? If you belong to a company that's large enough to have an Asian American ERG, I think that's where we see a lot of work. What I do appreciate in some of these cases is that people at the highest levels are really condemning, including their CEOs, condemning this hatred and the xenophobia. I really appreciate that work that has been done and people just really coming out, because I think, to something Angela said earlier, we need businesses and organizations to take that leadership mantle, because we're not seeing it in many of the traditional places where we expect that. And so I think there's a real opportunity for organizations to step up and do that. But as far as, really beyond that, I mean, I got to be honest, nothing really comes to mind. And it's not even, so it's not just, the part of the organization. I think it's that sometimes that we in our community aren't always vocal in terms of communicating what we need and really coming together that way. So just a few comments from my perspective.
Angela, do you have anything to add?
I have, I think the Asian American Writers Workshop is awesome. I'm a former board member of AAWW, and I just loved the people who I came across. They're so interesting. They have full-time jobs, and they're writing books on the side and getting them published. And so they're talking about their Asian American experiences, and I love that, because just to have a community in which you can share similar experiences, or shared experiences rather, I think is so powerful in becoming more self-aware.
Thank you so much. Another question that we have comes from Juan Alanis. What are your recommendations for local chapters, PRSA, PRSSA, to begin recruiting more diverse members when there's a lack of diversity in the current membership? Ted, I want to start off with you, given your background, as immediate past president of OCPRSA, if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I think the obvious for us has been creating that pipeline of diversity from the universities. We're really fortunate to have, Cal State's as well as UC system that is just filled with incredibly diverse, students. And so it's just really a matter of reaching out to them and saying, hey, you can be like me, or you can be like I, grammatically. And just being good examples, so really partnering with the local chapters, the local PRSSA chapters, but then also, wherever I go, whether it's a networking opportunity or whether it's a media mixer or a business event, I always will gravitate to young folks that represents diversity, whether it's Latino Americans or African Americans, etc. And let them know what I do and just find out what they're interested in and be a good example, because you never know where the seeds that you plant with that simple conversation or that simple handshake or just being kind to somebody will lead. And I will, share, my Twitter, Instagram, etc. I don't really use business cards anymore because, who uses business cards, especially with that generation. So, and continue that conversation online via Twitter or Instagram, et cetera. I think that's just so important. It's just to be an example, a positive example. I didn't have positive examples of role models that were PR professionals. The first time I walked into a PR meeting, it was filled with, people that didn't look like me. I didn't feel like I belonged. And now I'm sensing that I belong because I made myself belong. I made others belong to me. And owning myself and then owning the content around me. So I think you just have to be a really good example and really search out and seek out in order to make a difference. You can't passively just, go on and expect things to be better. You have to actively make things better.
Thank you, Ted. I don't know if Sumi or Angela had anything else to add on the topic.
Well, one thing I just wanted to add, as far as what Ted said, I mean, I think what Ted, you were getting at the inclusion part of it, right? And what I would say to, I guess the different chapters and so forth is that, I mean, I agree, Ted, when I was going getting into PR and so forth, I didn't feel welcome at our trade organizations whatsoever. And I still hear that now from students from underrepresented communities too, that they don't necessarily feel welcome either. And so I think that this idea of this kind of radical hospitality, radical inclusion, I think that's something that is something that we need to address beyond just saying that we need to increase the pipeline. I think that's of course important, but creating inclusive communities where people want to belong for those that are taking a chance of being in an industry that maybe they're the first of the people that they know and are entering.
Thank you so much. I think that wraps up the questions that we have. I just wanted to give a few minutes to our panelists to have any last thoughts that they want to share with everyone watching.
I think I'll just go to say how incredibly powerful this was, just hearing from the other panelists and just having that interaction as well. And I hope that PRSA will continue this conversation because it is so meaningful. And, let's make a difference. One ripple causes waves, right? And I hope that you folks all join us, in causing that wave of change that's so necessary for us to build better lives for the future generations as well. So, so let's join our big wave.
I think, thank you, Ted. I think being just showing up, in your organization and being part of developing that sense of belonging within your workplace and contributing to the inclusion part and supporting your colleagues and developing relationships with people. I think that's so important because it's not, and don't ever stop being you, because what makes you special are all the experiences that you've had in your life and continue to have. And so failure is built on a series of, success rather. Success is built on a series of failures. So if you fall down, just get up and keep going. And don't ever be afraid to ask for help and support, and know that you're part of a greater community, whether that's within the Asian American community or outside. And if you're looking for a mentor or a sponsor within your organization, that person may not necessarily be Asian American, but do take proactive measures in seeking out mentorship.
All right, well, I guess it's my turn. What I would say is, for those of you who have ever felt other, for those of you who are of Asian descent, but really anyone who has felt marginalized, different, that is your superpower. For me, it took me a really long time to recognize that and appreciate that. And what I mean by that is when you walk into a room, you have to read the room. You have to read the nuance. You have to understand the context. There is so much going on as we are kind of observing the lay of the land. And all of that is a skill that is so important and valuable to our industry. So I would just end by saying that all of that, don't be disheartened by it. It is truly your superpower. It is our superpower. And I would just say to celebrate that.
Thank you so much for those last thoughts. I want to thank all the panelists for joining this conversation, for being open, inclusive, and vulnerable with all of our attendees. Personally, I think this was an amazing conversation to have, and one of my first experiences being Asian American in the PR industry. So thank you so much. I can't be more grateful for this opportunity to have talks and moderate this conversation with you all.
Well, thank you, Carolyn. Thank you so much for being a great moderator. We really appreciate it. And I've already gotten 10 takers for the drone event. So next Thursday, you guys. So everybody else that wants to join, let's do this. Let's make it happen, because we can do anything. So let's make it happen to celebrate API month.
I agree, Ted. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry.
We can go ahead.
Museum of PR's event is next week, May 27th, Wednesday. So me and I are going to be on there. Ted, you're welcome to participate. We'll talk offline. And it's next Wednesday. So if you'd like this conversation, we'll continue it next week. So thank you, Carolyn. You were awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Attendees, feel free to reach out to all of us. I'm sure we'll all be glad to continue this well-needed conversation. But I hope you all have an excellent night. I hope to see you all at the next the Museum of PR event. I definitely will be attending. But thank you all again. Happy Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month.
Woo! Thank you. Come on. 谢谢. 감사합니다. Salam.